With breaking news, history in the making as a former American president is booked into county jail.
And here is something we have never seen before, a presidential mugshot taken inside that jail in Georgia.
Trump remained defiant as he addressed the media tonight.
Natalie Bopke joins us live with his remarks just before leaving Atlanta. Natalie.
And Trump calling this a travesty of justice, standing by his claim that the election was stolen.
I thought the election was a rigged election, a stolen election. I did nothing wrong, and everybody knows it. I've never had such support, and that goes with the other ones, too. What they're doing is election interference. They're trying to interfere with an election.
He had less than 24 hours to turn himself in to Georgia authorities. He arrived by private jet tonight in Atlanta, stepping onto the runway, flanked by Secret Service agents and a long entourage of vehicles.
Hi, everyone. Adam is here. Let me ask you something that keeps constitutional lawyers up at night. What actually happens when the most powerful person on earth decides a court order does not apply to him? Who shows up at the door? Who makes the call? Who pulls the trigger on something that has literally never happened before in American history? Because right now in 2026, we are closer to that scenario than most people realize.
We have more breaking news this morning. We've just learned that another individual has been indicted in the classified documents case against Donald Trump. Walt Nada, who was the man in the red tie right there, who had been a White House aide and then followed Donald Trump to Mar-a-Lago. He has been indicted in this case as well. CNN's Evan Perez back with us with the details here. Evan.
That's right, John. Walt Nada has been a figure, certainly, that's been central to this investigation. Prosecutors have allegedly been trying to pressure him. According to some of the lawyers in the Trump orbit, they've been pressuring him to try to flip, to try to turn against the former president. They say that he never did that. In recent days, Walt Nada was actually seen at Bedminster alongside the former president, among a group of aides who have been there with him as he was waiting to hear whether Jack Smith was going to indict him. And now he's now facing charges.
And the mainstream media is barely covering it. Not because it is not real, but because the full picture is complicated. It is deeply legal. And honestly, it is terrifying in ways that are hard to package into a 2-minute segment. But we are going to break it all down right here. Every piece of it. So stay with me because this one matters.
The federal judge in Donald Trump's New York criminal case found the former president in contempt for a 10th time today. The decision is a response to the former president repeatedly violating his gag order. Judge Marchand is now threatening Trump with jail time if he continues this behavior. The former president is charged with 34 felony counts for allegedly falsifying business records to cover up an alleged affair ahead of the 2016 election.
Here is what is actually happening. Federal judges across this country are running out of patience. They are issuing orders, they are setting deadlines, they are threatening fines and sanctions. And in the most serious cases, they are threatening jail time. And the Trump administration in hundreds of separate cases is just not complying. They are blowing past court orders like those orders do not exist.
This is the 10th time Trump has been held in contempt for violating his gag order. $10,000, I'm sure, is nothing, but a threat for jail time might be relevant. I wonder how that's being received and what this all means.
Hi, Lilia. So, yes, we're seeing a real escalation with these contempt findings. The judge is realizing that these $1,000 monetary fines are really not much of a deterrent for Donald Trump. We know that given his wealth, that's really just a very tiny fraction for him. So the judge is now saying that jail is on the table if this continues. And so far, we really haven't seen these gag order violations stopping Trump's rhetoric. If anything, he uses them to boost his fundraising. We've often seen these legal troubles boost him in the polls, and perhaps he's even daring this threat of jail, which is
like the judicial branch is just a suggestion. Like the law only applies to people who are not on the winning team. And here is the thing that most people are completely missing. This is not just about immigration. This is not just about deportation flights. This is about something way more fundamental than any one policy. This is about whether the courts in this country still have any real power at all. Because if the executive branch can ignore judges whenever it feels like it with zero consequences, then we do not have three branches of government anymore. We have one, and it happens to be the one with the guns, the planes, and the agents. Now, I want to be really clear about something before we go any further. Nobody has arrested Trump. There has been no dramatic scene on any tarmac. No federal agents blocking Air Force One. That is viral fiction that keeps circulating on social media. And we are not doing that here. What we are doing is something way more important than that. We are walking through the real legal mechanism. The one that actually exists. The one that would apply if a federal court issued a contempt warrant against someone in this administration. We are showing you what the law actually says. And we are asking out loud whether the system has enough left in it to enforce itself. Because here is what is genuinely wild about all of this. The legal framework for holding a president or his top officials in contempt, it exists. It is real. It has been on the books since 1789. The question has never been whether the power exists. The question is whether anyone has the guts to use it. And right now, a handful of federal judges are starting to find out exactly what happens when they try. One judge in Minnesota, and this is important, this man is a George W. Bush appointee. Not a liberal activist, not a Biden judge, a conservative jurist appointed by a Republican president. And he sat down and listed out 96 separate court orders that ICE had violated. 96 violations across 74 different cases. And he wrote, and I am going to paraphrase this because it is stunning, that he was not aware of another occasion in the entire history of the United States where a federal court had threatened contempt again and again and again just to make the government follow the law. Again and again and again. Those were his words from a Bush appointee about the current administration. Are you kidding me? This is not partisan. This is not the resistance. This is a conservative judge saying the rule of law is in crisis. And he is not alone. Once you understand how contempt actually works, what the U.S. Marshals can do, what the real legal trap looks like, you are going to see this entire situation in a completely different light. So let us dig in. Let us start from the very beginning because a lot of people genuinely do not know how this system is supposed to work. And when you understand the structure, when you see how it was designed from day one, the current situation becomes even more alarming than it already looks on the surface. The federal court system has been around since 1789. And from day one, from the very first session of Congress, lawmakers gave the courts one critical enforcement tool. It is called contempt of court. And the idea behind it is simple. If you do not follow a court order, the court can punish you. It can impose fines. It can issue sanctions. It can, in extreme cases, order jail time. The power is, as the Supreme Court itself has said, essential to the very authority of the courts. Without the contempt power, a court order is just a piece of paper. It is decorative. It means absolutely nothing. In a system where orders mean nothing is not a legal system at all. It is theater. Now, who actually enforces contempt orders? Who physically shows up and makes it happen when a judge decides someone needs to be held accountable? That is where the U.S. Marshals Service comes in. Most people do not know much about the Marshals. They are not the FBI. They are not the CIA. They do not get the same Hollywood treatment. But they are actually the oldest federal law enforcement agency in this entire country, created in 1789, the same year the courts themselves were established. And by law, not by tradition, not by custom, but by actual federal statute, it is the primary role and mission of the United States Marshals Service to obey, execute, and enforce all orders of the federal courts. That is not optional language. That is the mission statement. Execute and enforce all orders of the federal courts. Full stop. So when a federal judge issues a contempt order, when a judge says this person needs to face consequences and this order needs to be enforced, the marshals are the mechanism. They are the ones who carry out the warrant. They are the ones who make the arrest if it ever comes to that. Now here is where it gets genuinely complicated, and here is where we start talking about what is actually happening right now in 2026. Because the marshals are part of the Justice Department. They operate under the direction of the Attorney General, which means, in theory, a president who controls the Attorney General also has some degree of influence over what the marshals do and do not do on any given day. That tension between the courts having the authority to issue orders and the executive branch having control over the people who enforce those orders is exactly the fault line we are sitting on right now, and it is being tested in real time in courtrooms across the country. Let us go through the actual cases because the details matter and they tell the story better than any abstract argument could. In early 2026, the Trump administration launched an operation in Minnesota. Thousands of ICE agents deployed across the state all at once. Mass arrests, rapid detentions, deportation proceedings moving at a pace the courts could barely keep up with, and judges, including that Bush appointee, started finding that ICE was violating their orders. Not once, not twice, not 5 times, 96 times across 74 cases. And that judge did not just write an angry opinion and move on with his day. He threatened criminal contempt, not civil contempt where you pay a fine and go home, criminal contempt, which means potential jail time, which means government officials, people with federal badges and government salaries, could end up behind bars for defying a judge's order. And when that threat landed, the administration blinked. They complied in that specific case. But the judge was not done. He made something crystal clear in his ruling. He said the court had been extraordinarily patient with the government. He said lesser measures have been tried, and they have failed. And he promised on the record that if it happened again, he would do whatever was required to protect the rule of law. Whatever was required. Those words from a federal judge about the sitting administration are not something you hear every day. Then there is the case out of Washington, D.C., and this one is even more dramatic. A federal judge found probable cause that the Trump administration had willfully defied his order in the deportation of Venezuelan migrants. The administration used an old law to deport over 200 people. These were people who had active court orders protecting them from removal, and the administration rushed the deportation flights out before the judge could stop them. He issued a stop order. The planes were already in the air, and the administration just let them fly anyway. The judge was direct in his ruling. He said the Constitution does not tolerate willful disobedience of judicial orders, especially by officials who have sworn an oath to uphold it. He said allowing this kind of defiance would make a solemn mockery of the Constitution itself. A solemn mockery of the Constitution. Those are the words of a sitting federal judge about the sitting administration, and here is the part that almost nobody is talking about, and it might be the most important part of this entire story. Trump's allies on the appeals court, judges he appointed, actually stepped in to pause the judge's contempt investigation. They raised a question about whether he even has the legal authority to investigate contempt on his own, or whether he has to hand it off to the Justice Department. The same Justice Department that works for Trump. Think about what that would actually mean in practice. If courts cannot run their own contempt proceedings, if they have to send everything to the executive branch for a decision on whether to prosecute, then the executive branch has effectively handed itself immunity from judicial enforcement. You defy a court order. You hand the contempt referral to your own attorney general. She decides not to prosecute. Nothing happens. The judge is powerless. Every court in the country is powerless. Legal experts, people who have served in justice departments under both Republican and Democratic presidents, are saying this argument, if it wins, could create a permanent loophole through which the president and his people can ignore court orders without any fear of consequences. Any court order, any time. That is not a legal theory anymore. That is a blueprint. Let us bring all of this together now. Let us break it down into the points that actually matter. Point 1. The legal trap is real, and it is already being tested. The framework for holding the executive branch in contempt is not theoretical. It has been on the books for over 200 years. Courts have used it against governors, against cabinet secretaries, against agencies and officials at every level of government. What is unprecedented is the scale, the pattern, the breadth of the defiance. One judge described this administration as likely violating more court orders in a single month than some federal agencies have violated in their entire existence. 1 month. That is not an administration that made some procedural mistakes. That is an administration that made a deliberate choice. The marshals are the mechanism, and that is where things get very complicated very fast. Here is the thing about the U.S. Marshals that people need to understand. They serve two masters at the same time. By law, by their actual written mission statement, they are required to enforce all orders of the federal courts. That is the job. That is the reason they exist. But they are also employees of the Department of Justice, which is run by the Attorney General, who is appointed by and serves at the pleasure of the President. So what happens when those two obligations point in opposite directions? What happens when a court issues a warrant for a government official and the Attorney General tells the marshals to stand down? Nobody knows because it has never happened at this scale or at this level of government. The argument Trump's allies are making might be the most dangerous part of this entire story. The argument being made in the D.C. Circuit right now that judges cannot run their own contempt investigations and must hand everything off to the DOJ is not just a technical procedural argument. It is a structural argument. It is an argument that would permanently neuter the judiciary as an independent branch of government. If that argument wins, it means the executive branch can defy court orders with no real fear of judicial enforcement. Courts can write all the opinions they want. They can issue all the orders they want. But if the only people who can execute those orders work for the person being held in contempt, the whole system becomes circular. It collapses in on itself. And the damage would not end with this administration. Every future president would inherit that same structural immunity. Point 4. This is already affecting real people right now. Behind the contempt orders and the circuit court arguments and the constitutional theory, there are actual human beings. Immigrants who were detained without warrants. People who had active court orders protecting them and got deported anyway. People sitting in a prison in another country right now who a federal judge said should not be there. When court orders stop getting enforced, when the system stops working the way it is supposed to, the people who pay the price first are always the most vulnerable. The ones without lawyers, without resources, without the ability to fight back. So where does all of this actually go from here? The most optimistic scenario is that the courts hold the line. Judges keep issuing contempt orders. The administration keeps blinking at the last minute, complying right before the consequences fully kick in because they do not want to trigger the full constitutional crisis that will follow if they openly refuse a direct judicial order. That has been the general pattern so far. Push to the edge, pull back, push again somewhere else. The second scenario is escalation. At some point in some specific case, on some specific issue, the administration decides not to pull back, decides to make the confrontation explicit and public. And then we find out in real time with the whole country watching whether the judiciary has enough institutional support to actually enforce its own authority. The third scenario, and honestly the scariest one, is the slow erosion. Not a dramatic confrontation. Not one big televised moment that history books will remember. Just a gradual hollowing out of judicial authority over months and years. The courts keep issuing orders. The administration keeps mostly ignoring them. The fines stay small. The consequences stay manageable. And over time, slowly, quietly, everyone just accepts that courts cannot actually make the executive branch do anything it does not want to do. That third scenario is the scariest because it does not have a clear moment you can point to and say that is when it happened. It just happens quietly, incrementally. And by the time there is broad public consensus that it is a crisis, the damage is already done and the precedent is already set. Right now in 2026, the machinery of judicial enforcement in this country is under more stress than it has been in generations. Judges are doing their best to hold it together with the tools they have. Some of those tools are working. Some of them are being actively undermined in the courts above. And the question of whether this system survives, whether the checks and balances mean anything going forward, is genuinely open right now. It is not settled. It is being decided case by case, order by order. Contempt hearing by contempt hearing in courtrooms that most people will never hear about. We are going to keep watching every single one. We are going to keep telling you what is actually happening. Not the viral fiction, not the watered-down version, not the corporate-approved take. The real story, because that is what this channel is for. The next chapter of this story is going to move fast. You want to be ahead of it.